Yeah, let me do that. And I think it's getting recorded now.
Yeah, we got a notification. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for confirmation. I'll just continue my lecture. So, yeah, so Ricky, definitely, Ricky is, so I did two projects, and both projects were in the different direction, like extreme direction of the world. And in both the projects, wherever we had some issue related to analytics, Ricky was there to help. So she has been all around the analytics space. She started on Salesforce platform in Capgemini, and then she worked with Mac Positive as well. Very few people knows that Ricky is also a very good product consultant. So she did a lot of marketing automation stuff before she started on analytics. She's a blogger. She blogs on salesforceblogger.com, as well as she did a very awesome event last year, which is data dreaming, and a lot of people from the audience might have attended that event. And so she is kind of all about giving back in terms of blogs or videos or sharing the content and so on. So here she is today with us. The second speaker for today is Johann, and Johann, I always speak his name like misspell his name, Johann. So Johann is setting a new benchmark every time, every week. He's constantly into giving back. He's giving back in terms of videos, in terms of very meaningful and concise, power-packed blog content on his website as well as on LinkedIn. He puts in a lot of content. Very good thing about Johan that I have interacted with him a lot, and I know about him is he's like he will never say no to anything. He'll, if he doesn't know, he'll just say that, hey, let's come together and explore it, and then he will write a blog after on it after a month or two. So that's something about him. He is a CTA. He does he does a lot of other things like consulting in terms of if you are facing some issue, you just reach out to him. He's like all over it, and he'll just help you out. He started his own company, Admin's Hero, recently, and currently is doing a lot of app exchange app building, and there are a few apps that he has built. If just check them out, those are very good. And about me, I'm a technical architect, enterprise technical architect at PwC India, and I run a Salesforce developers group on Facebook, which has more than 19K developers. No fake people. They all are developers. I moderate them, and I also started one of the first architect summit in Pune before COVID, and we could not continue it because of the COVID, but that was an awesome event that we did in Pune. And I'm a Dreamforce speaker. I speak in various community events. I'm Salesforce Indore developer group lead as well. So I'm very happy to be hosting this event today, and I hope in next 45 or 50 minutes or so you'll get a lot of good insights. What we want to achieve in this through this SAIMA event. So basically what we want to do is we want to share and create content, because we have seen that a lot of people have achieved a lot of heights in their respective domains, and if we have to do the same thing, then it's better to learn from them rather than rebuilding or reinventing the wheel and doing our own research on the content, doing on our own preparation. If we get something out of the experts in this field, then it becomes very easier to kind of follow them. But having said that, we also have a disclaimer there that we are not affiliated with Salesforce in any way, right? So whatever the speakers who are speaking here in various sessions is their own experiences that they've gained over the years, or maybe through their implementation. So don't go by that, go by Salesforce documentation, but treat the whatever content that you have as a guidance to learn more about those topics. With that, there are some housekeeping rules that we have. Please mute yourself. So in last 5-10 minutes, you have been very good at that. Please keep it continued throughout the session. If you have any questions, and you should definitely have some questions, because that's my job to ask the questions. You don't want me to make jobless, so just ask those questions in the chat section. I'll be happy to convey it to the speakers, and then we'll get it answered at the end. We are not perfect. We don't know everything about whatever is being presented. So if you spot a mistake somewhere in the content, somewhere in somebody speaking, point it out, let us know. We'll be happy to correct it, because we all are learning from each other. We all are feeding each other. So it's not like, we are perfect. If you're interested in presenting and hosting a content that you have learned, again, just reach out to any of the team leaders of SAIMA, and we'll be happy to connect with you and take it from there. So that's about it. Now, moving on to today's topic, that is Salesforce reporting solutions. And over to you, Ricky. Now, I just make you presenter. Give me a minute.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so
I'm just trying to.
um, I'm just trying to find you. Okay, yeah, here you are, and just made you the host.
All right. Okay, so hopefully you can all hear me, and hopefully you can see my screen in a little bit. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. You made me seem so, I don't know, capable and great. So I do appreciate that. Also kind of means that I don't really have to do an introduction for myself, but yeah, so just shortly, my name is Ricky, as you know, and I work for Salesforce. I work in our Analytics Center of Excellence, which is a team that basically, well, one of the tasks that we're doing is helping with solution architecting for some of our customers when they're hitting some difficulties. So it's just one of the many tasks that I do. So anyway, I feel like it kind of fits into the narrative that you are having for this event. As I said, I do work for Salesforce, so you have seen this before. I do have to show it. Basically, if you're making any purchasing decision, please based on what is currently available in the platform. I don't think that I'm going to be talking about new features, but nonetheless, I do want to show that up. So I'm making sure I cover my bases with that slide. So I was asked to talk about native reporting in Salesforce, and I'll cover a little bit more about the native reporting, why I'm talking about native reporting for TCRM in a little bit later. However, as the path for like the purpose of this user group is about architect or the path to become an architect, I figured I will not show what I normally do, which is about creating analytic assets. Instead, I want to talk about some of the things that I thought might be interesting for you, which is mostly around the flow of data when we're talking about reporting. As you'll also notice, I've emphasized a lot around Tableau CRM. I should probably say formerly known as Einstein Analytics, formerly known as Wave. If you've ever come across any of those terminologies or names, it's all the same. Now, the reason I'm putting emphasis on the Tableau CRM is, of course, because that is what I do day to day, but I'm also making the assumption that a lot of you already are familiar with the operational reports and dashboards that we have and how that works, and where maybe you're having some gaps is around the Tableau CRM side. So that's kind of what I wanted to dig into. So I figured let's just get started. Hopefully, oh, let's see, there we go. Let's first have a look at a couple of use cases before we get into all the technical stuff. So for each one of the tools that we have available in Tableau, or so not Tableau, it's Salesforce core, or at least in terms of the native reporting, we have here 3 use cases. And one of the tools should be able to solving one of these. This is, of course, my opinion. I'm not going to tell you what I think is the tool to solve each of these use cases just yet. I'm going to save that for the end, but have a ponder about it. The first use case is I want to be able to get an overview of my pipeline and identify missed opportunities. And the second one is I want to be able to see a list of leads and contacts attending my webinar. And the final one is I want to be able to prioritize which opportunity to focus on based on the likelihood of it to win or close in a one status. So as I said, there are different tools that I'm going to present throughout this presentation, and hopefully you can map by the end of this. So what are the three tools that I'm talking about? Well, I'm talking about operational reporting. I'm talking about Tableau CRM, and I'm also talking about Einstein Discovery. So these are the native tools. Of course, you've also heard of Tableau, but that's not part of the Salesforce data center, which is why I'm not calling that a native reporting tool. Now, when we're looking at operational reporting, some of the key characteristics here are that you are dealing with live queries from the objects. It's also where everybody have access to this tool, so it's kind of easy for everybody to leverage because it is just generally available for all your users as long as they have the permission to do so. And then the way that I typically say that I want to use it is more for those simple questions and also for small data volumes, because of the fact that you are dealing with queries directly from the object. So you might have seen that little timeout issue sometimes, and you have to apply filters. That's a fun one. And that is just because of the way that that tool is working. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after or later. We have Tableau CRM. What we're actually doing here is we are querying from a Tableau CRM data store. That also means that we can deal with data at scale. So we can deal with billions of rows of data when we're talking about processing it, but also querying this data. We can take our core Salesforce as well as our external data, and we can bring it in and we can get reporting and analytics from that. So typically, Tableau CRM is focused on more of that strategic data insight when we're dealing with the CRM data. Then we have Einstein Discovery, which is actually part of the Tableau CRM platform. It is our predictive tool, so you can use it to take any of your data sets that we're generating from the Tableau CRM side, and you can detect patterns in this. You can also use it to start taking some data sets, so you're training a predictive model to make predictions, and you can deploy that into core Salesforce to start, looking for help to your salespeople or any other business case that you might have. That's just a typical one. All right. With that said, I wanted to just talk a little bit about why do I say native? And the reason around this is that Tableau CRM is actually part of the Salesforce data center. There's a dedicated part of it that is focused for Tableau CRM. And hold on, I might have to, it looks like my headphones are.
Yeah, maybe, no. Hopefully you can still hear me.
Yeah,
Yes.
no problem.
Loud and
Good. It was just I had there's no more battery in my headphones, so we're going off of the yeah. Anyway, so I was saying that it is part of the dedicated, so there's a dedicated part of the Salesforce data center for Tableau CRM. And there are parts of the core architecture that we're using. So when we're looking at sharing and collaboration, the governance, the users, administration, of course, also the Salesforce object, we're taking everything from the core side, from the Salesforce that we know, and leveraging it in CCRM. However, we do have this dedicated part where we're bringing in our data when we are transforming our data, and we have our query engine. And this is just because that we can then start, this dedicated part is dedicated and optimized for dealing with data at scale, which, operational reporting is not. So let's talk a little bit about data store, because that is really where the main difference is. So when we're looking at operational reports, our standard Salesforce reporting, we have to work with report types. A lot of them come out of box, but you can also create those, of course, as you see fit. Generally, you are joining objects by moving downwards in the hierarchy. So in this specific example that you see on the screen, we have accounts, which is the starting point, and we're moving downwards, getting opportunities and opportunity line item. This is in a direct level, and you can go 3 levels down. Of course, there are some workarounds that we can do, but this is how you are working with combining the data that you have in Salesforce and getting them out into a report. Now in Tableau CRM, we're using data sets. This works a little bit differently. Generally, we are working with the lowest level, the grain level. It has a lot of different names, but that is the root. So if we take it the same example as before, we now have our opportunity line item as the first starting point, and we're moving upwards in the hierarchy, bringing in opportunities, accounts, and in this case, also owner. Now, what we're doing here is we have no restrictions in terms of how many levels out you want to do. And as long as you have a unique identifier, something linking the 2 data sources together, you can join them together in your data sets. Now, what we also have here is we have the opportunity to go ahead and apply different transformations. So if you want to do calculations or aggregate information, or use some of our machine learning capabilities, you can do that directly on the data set and enrich your data. Once you've kind of done all the transformations you want to do, we do register it as a data set. It's kind of like a normalized data, and consider it's like an Excel file containing several different objects per 1 row. At the point where we're registering this data set to be utilized for reporting, everything, all your dimensions are indexed. And this is really what allows us to work with data at scale. So we have, as I said earlier, I think we can process and work with billions of rows of data. All right, so I said that we're using data sets and we have to register those in order for us to get data in a dashboard. However, we can use Salesforce Direct. So we don't always have to register a data set. We can query live directly from core Salesforce. We can also, if you have the Snowflake connector set up, you can also use the live connection there and query directly from Snowflake within a dashboard. Now, obviously, this is coming with some restrictions around, performance, because we are querying live data that is not being indexed and all these kind of things. So do keep that in mind if you go down to these elements. But I wanted to make sure you were aware that it's not just data set. We can actually query live as well. All right, let's have a look at the data landscape of Tableau CRM. Now, one key thing for an architect to be aware of is this data landscape. And there's a lot of different governance limits to be aware of when we're setting up this flow of data for our reporting purposes. So let's go ahead and break that down a little bit. So if we start looking at the data sync, and the connectors. So what you see here on the left side is all the options that we have to bring in data using our connectors. Obviously, we have our local Salesforce objects that we can bring in, but there's a lot of different connections that you can set up to bring data in from other Salesforce orgs, from Marketing Cloud, from Snowflake, and so forth. Look at the documentation. That's the easiest way to see the latest connections that we have. Now, we will initiate from a TCRM side a fetch to go in and grab this data at a scheduled point in time. So you set up a schedule to say, hey, I want to bring it over every day at noon, for instance. And we are then bringing this data in. We're fetching it, pulling it into a cache-free layer where it's ready for us to use in any of our data flows and recipes, which is basically what is generating our data sets. So the next thing, as I said, is these data flows and recipes. Our this is where we take this external data, internal data, and we transform it, we join it together. We can apply different kinds of calculations. As I said, machine learning, we are in general available from the next, for the summer release. We have clustering, we have time series, we have sentiment analysis, which is some of the what's it called, machine learning capabilities. But there's also just simple calculations, windowing, aggregate. Yeah, have a play with it. It's there's a lot of opportunities in there, but also making it a lot more flexible than your operational reporting. You bring all of this together, and you most likely on a schedule bring it out to different data sets that you then use in your dashboards. Now, you do have some limits to consider in terms of how many flows you can run in parallel, how many times you can run a flow in 24-hour rolling period. So from an architect perspective, when you're setting up this data landscape, you do have to keep that in mind. Now, the next thing that we have is also external data, because sometimes you have on-prem data, you have CSV files that you want to upload. You can go ahead and do that. You can bring in this data using the API. Of course, also with the CSV upload, you can just do it using the UI. But you're bringing this data in, and once it's in, it's not going into this cache-free layer. Instead, it goes in directly as a data set. Now, once you have it in as a data set, you can still bring in the data sets as well as your cast layer or your connected objects into data flows and recipes. So there's nothing stopping you from actually taking this external data that you're getting in and combining it with your objects to make new data sets. As I said, just keep in mind all these governance limits, because you can see that it can become quite complex. Just with this one slide, the landscape can become quite complex, and you need to make sure that you're not messing it up for yourself down the road. So you want to get it right from the beginning. Generally, I find that it takes a lot longer cleaning it up than setting it up from correctly from the beginning. So that's definitely one of my advice for you guys to keep in mind. All right, let's talk a little bit about security. Obviously, security is a very, very important thing. From a operational reporting side, everybody can have access to it. Of course, you do need to have the system permission to access reports and dashboard. Once you run a report, you will see the data that you see depends on what you have access to. So we're using the Salesforce security model, organization-wide default, role hierarchy, sharing rules, manual sharing, all of these things comes into play here. Now, from a TCRM perspective, we do need to have, again, a permission set that defines system permissions, what we can access. So are we allowed to upload custom maps? Are we allowed to modify data flows? All these different components can be controlled with system permissions. You do also need to, of course, have the license. That might already be clear. If it's not, you do need to have a license. There are different types, but generally, you do need to have that in order to access, do anything, and see Tableau CRM dashboards. Now, when we're talking about the actual security of our data, there are two ways of achieving this. We have sharing inheritance and we have security predicate. So sharing inheritance actually uses the Salesforce sharing model. So when we have a data set, we define a source. Let's say our data set is all about opportunities. We can then define opportunity as the sharing source. That means we go in and look at the sharing object for the opportunities, and we're then using those descriptors to say, hey, can you actually access this row or not in the data set? Always just look at the documentation, because there are some scenarios where you're not able to use this, especially, for instance, if you're using external data, you are not able to use the sharing inheritance. However, we have security predicate. That was kind of like the native way of working with security in Tableau CRM. And for each row, you are defining who are allowed to see it. So you can see here, I have an example. There is a row in my data set that is opportunity owner ID. So who is the ID or the owner ID for this specific opportunity? If that is equal, and then the user ID, I can go in and see this. So you can go in and make very complex security predicates, but the key thing is you're mapping something from the data set to your user ID, or sorry, to your user, logged in user person in the object. So it has to be fields on your object there. Now, the next thing that we have is, or next thing that we want to be aware of is from a TCRM perspective, we do not consider field level security. So if you have a specific field that, you know, people are not supposed to see, then this is not something that we are able to take into consideration, at least not yet. Who knows what happens in the future, but from the current point, field level security is not a thing. Generally, I do see that people are not, those that are hidden in field level security for certain users, it's not something you generally do reporting with anyway. So don't bring those fields over, because people will be able to see it here. All right, going back to the business cases. So from the beginning, we had these different use cases. And the first one was around, I want to be able to get an overview of my pipeline and identify missed opportunities. I'm saying Tableau CRM here because even though, of course, you can see some of this in operational reporting, if you want to start drilling down into the business and figure out, hey, what actually happened here? Maybe white space analysis. There's a lot of different things that you can go in and combine in this specific use case. Well, that's really what Tableau CRM is geared for, that quick drilling down into a use case or a scenario, data scenario. Use case number 2. I want to be able to see a list of leads and contacts attending my webinar. Operational reporting. Don't worry about creating all those data sets, because you do have to create the data sets first. And that's the whole data you have to bring in the data first of all, prep it, register it as a data set. It's a consuming process. Plus, you don't want to give all users access to building out data sets. That's not ideal. So I would say for this specific scenario, operational reporting is way more geared. It's faster to do it this way. It's very simple, low data volume. I would use operational reporting in this case. The use case 3, I want to be able to prioritize which opportunities to focus on based on the likelihood for it to close. And in the scenario 1, well, this is, you know, where Einstein discovery comes in. You can go in, get data from your opportunity, from your products, and look at the history of what has happened with these opportunities, and then go in and train a model to say, what is the likelihood of any open opportunities you have based on different criteria, maybe the products you've added, the color of the products that you've added. All of these things can go in and determine or help determine if this opportunity is something that we are believing is going to be close won. And so once you have that deployed into core Salesforce and your opportunities, you can then start prioritizing and say, hey, why am I spending hours and hours on this opportunity when it has a very low likelihood of being a one opportunity? So that's a really good use case for that. Hopefully you agree with me. If not, we can definitely discuss that. Wanted to bring up some resources before I open up for question. But we have some Academy videos. So I didn't show you how do we create a data set. I didn't show you how to create a dashboard. It's quite fun, and you know, find your own little data project to do it if you haven't had a chance to do this yet. But once you're getting into the nitty-gritty of how do I do X, Y, and Z, then have a look at this Academy video. We have, I think it's, yeah, put it on the side, 54 videos on everything around TCRM and also Einstein discovery of how to use this. And then from a data orchestration blog series, I have this link as well, which is a recent blog that, or series actually, that is covering a lot of the same elements that I've been talking about today around how do you look at your data landscape, how do you, what considerations, governance limits, all these things should you consider for data sync, for your data flow, for orchestrating the different data flows and having dependent data flows. Covering that in 7 blocks, so it's quite, takes a lot of, it gives you a lot of information. Obviously, it doesn't cover everything in terms of how do you then create different elements. But from an architect point of view, I think this is really a valuable series. And then also, as was said, I do have a blog where I post on a regular basis every month around Tableau CRM. Can be use cases, tutorials, best practices, new features, a lot of different things. So if this topic interests you, have a look there. And hopefully there will be some interesting elements. And I guess time for questions, if there is any.
Sure. Rikke, can we have questions at the end? We have another session from Johann.
Okay, of course. That is completely fine. I will then say this is all I had, so I'll stop sharing.
Please pass on the, and please pass on the host rights to Johann.
Okay.
So that was an awesome, awesome session, Rikke. Thank you very much. Got to know a lot of things, and every time it has been a very vast space. Every time you hear someone, you get to know always something new around, it. And there are 2-3 things that I thought I could do better in one of my implementation recently that I did. So thank you very much for that. And definitely there's a good question that we have that will ask at the end. So friends, there is another perspective on this topic from Johann, who is a CTA. So let's hear from Johann. Johann, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you give me the press? So I share my screen. Okay, I used this chance that I actually asked my first question to Rikke ahead of time. Excuse me for taking this. What about exposing Tableau CRM reports on public websites, Rikke?
Well, you do need to have the license. So we do have community access. So if you want to post to a community, but generally you do need to have the license. So that's not something that we're supporting.
This is good to know. We had this discussion very lively yesterday. Thanks very much for confirming. It's always great to get it from the source directly. So some of you might know I have a Road to CTA series, and today is the episode 15 about reporting. Know your reporting considerations. The CTA itself is really, really hard, but I would say the reporting part, the reporting section of the review board is not easy, but it's one of the easier things. Why do I say that? The number of different not that reporting is easy. I mean, I have highest respect for everybody who sets up this complex reporting requirements, but just from an architect point of view, it's a limited set of requirements and a limited set of options we have. It's not like that we have an unlimited number of reporting options. And today I want to do the two. I want to bring together the requirements as I see them, the possible requirements and the possible solutions, and then we match them together so we can find an easy, let's call it decision tree, to go into reporting considerations. I don't want to go into too much technical details. I think you all can figure them out yourself, read the documentation. It's just more from a decision tree point of view. But again, disclaimer, I did my CTA more than a half a year ago, so my information might be outdated by now. Always check for the latest information. And I also learned something today. You never stop learning. So I started at the top. Topics to consider, things to consider, or possible requirements. This is now we have on-platform reporting. When I say on-platform, I mean Salesforce core report, which is standard Salesforce reports. We have off-platform or cross-platform. Cross-platform means between Salesforce and some other platform. We have to consider the data volume. Is it high or low? We have to consider, is there data crunching calculation needed, as we just learned? Thank you very much, which can be done in datasets. We have to know who is our audience. Is it internal, like Salesforce users, or internal users, or is it external users, like partner community, customer community? Are these people authenticated or not? Also, are they logged in or are they not logged in? Is it a public website? And the last two is it a complex visualization, for example, a map, or Lilith brought up the example of migrating birds. And the last one, is it how high is the cardinality? How often does it actually happen? This is my personal pet topic. If I get complex reporting requirements from my customers in my projects as a consultant, and then the customer tells me, yes, this is 2 people who do it like once a year, I'm like, okay, problem solved, we use Excel. So we can strike the last one off the list if it's low cardinality, also happens seldom with a limited number of people. Microsoft Power BI, Excel, perfectly fine solution. Not over-engineered. I hope Rikke agrees there with me later. Doesn't say no, it has to be done properly. But then what solutions do we actually have? It's not that many. We have standard Salesforce reports. We have a BI tool, either Tableau CRM or Tableau. Today, I want to focus on Tableau CRM. Or there's other BI tools out there which are also amazing, but we are still Salesforce people. Let's stay within Salesforce. Then we have Lightning Web Component plus a JavaScript library. This shouldn't be underutilized. This is, I think, one of the solutions we don't use often enough. It's easy to use. It can get us a lot of mileage. And lastly, it's public reports. This means it's something on a website where we have HTML and either a Heroku database or via the and then get the data via the ESB, either from Salesforce or Heroku or data warehouse. Basically, we build our own reporting engine, but not in a complex way. So this is it for our options. And now let's bring them together. It sounds as you all know, we usually have like 2 or 3 different options for every problems. I want to start at the top for on platform. If it's on platform, my first preferred solution is Salesforce reports. This doesn't mean it's always Salesforce reports. It might be that we use Lightning Web Component reports. I will go into details later when, or even if the Salesforce data, the data is on platform, even Tableau CRM can be a valid option depending on the circumstances. But the standard solution is, if nothing else comes into place, Salesforce reports. Good. Next one is if it's off platform or cross platform. This is easy. We need a BI tool. So therefore we go to Tableau CRM or Tableau. There is almost no other solutions there. If we have low data volume, this is the next consideration. Then we stay with Salesforce reports. And the other options. But if the data volume is high, and which is, I would say, even a couple of thousand records already, we should use a proper BI tool. Yes, we can somehow make 20,000 records work in a report in Salesforce. Is it very performant? Absolutely not. Does it scale well to millions? Not. Therefore, Tableau CRM, but also a Lightning Web Component report can be a valid option. We can have, let's say, you want to show me the last hang on, the sum of the last 50,000 orders. I can use an Apex class to get it and use a Lightning Web Component to display the numbers. So for high data volume, we have 2 options. If we have to do data crunching, the same. Data crunching, Salesforce reports is really not good, and please do not suggest, we all know them, the reporting fields, the reporting formula fields. Who of you has built a reporting formula field in the last 2 weeks? I have, and I feel guilty about it, and it is on my list of technical debt. We all know them. And at some point, you hit the limit of 500 fields on an object because 450 of them are reporting fields. Rather go for Tableau CRM or Tableau, especially since Tableau CRM is so well integrated with Salesforce that from a user point of view, it often feels like a native report if you have to do data crunching. And especially for the CTA there. Then if, again, another distinction is it internal audience versus external audience. So if we have internal audience, we can, again, the same options as before, but if the audience is external, which means customer community, partner community, or customer community plus users, I would say my personal preferred suggestion is actually Lightning Web Component reports. Why? you can do great visualization and make it pixel perfect. Hey, I'm the biggest Salesforce reports fan out there. This is what I love. I love dashboards. But from a customer facing perspective, we have a very limited set of options to make it our own dashboard. Can you follow me there? If you show a Salesforce dashboard to a not Salesforce user, it might not match your branding, it might not match your company style. You have therefore Lightning Web Component with a nice charting library can do get really far. But you also can use Salesforce standard reports, and again, Tableau CRM or Tableau, Tableau kind of. You have to have an extra license, but if you get with this extra license, you have again great ways of customization and making it interactive. If the user is authenticated, we stay with the same solutions as before. But if the user is unauthenticated, and this requirement is almost in every scenario, and almost every company has this requirement, the requirement that we need a public report. And this one, I would suggest we use HTML, also a JavaScript again, a website, plus the ESP, and the ESP gets then the data from either a data warehouse, from Salesforce, wherever it needs it. We could also use, this is why I asked, Tableau for public-facing reports. But oftentimes, if this is the only requirement where we need Tableau, this is not my suggested solution. And as far as I understood Rikke here, again, we cannot build unauthenticated public reports using Tableau CRM, correct, Rikke?
Yes.
So I have to actually update my decision tree here. Thank you very much. So this is why it's so important not to trust me. Everything double check what I say. And the last one is complex visualizations. Again, my personal preferred way, like the first way of doing it, is using a public reporting with or Lightning Web Component, so HTML or JavaScript. We can also use Tableau or Tableau CRM, depends on the specific requirements. Do not say, this is my, I hear that too often. Just because the requirement says, please, we need the data to be visible on our maps, does not mean we should go for Salesforce Maps. Salesforce Maps is not a reporting app. It's an app, and a great app which has a lot of functionality, but it's not there to data visualization. Salesforce Lightning Web Components and the data, there's great libraries to visualize data on maps, which is not Salesforce Maps. Okay. I know this was a lot. Therefore, I brought 3 examples. And not only the solution is kind of easy for the example, more the way of thinking. And before we go into the examples, just of another additional topics to consider, make sure you know the security option for each of the options. Make sure you know the connectors for each option. How does it work in a multi-org environment? How does it work if you have especially financial data, HIPAA data? Know the license requirements. So coming back to, just because we need one report for our customer community users, I would not give them customer community plus license, because this is an overkill. So also know the license implications. Know your data model. Don't change your data model just to create one report. Maybe you have to use a Lightning Web Component or Tableau CRM to do some reporting if your data model does not support it. At the same time, also make sure that your data model is simple enough so standard Salesforce reports can do a lot of the reporting. So it goes both ways, kind of. I would say if your data model is clean, most of your reports can be done on your standard Salesforce data model, also on your data model, but don't change the data model too much just to make reporting happen. We have Tableau CRM, which can do a lot of data transformation. Org strategy considerations, there's a lot of that. I can't go into details here. Indexing and filtering. This is especially important for on-platform reports. You have to understand what indexing and why you need to have proper filtering for standard Salesforce reports to make them performant. Especially in enterprise environment, we often have very high data volume. This data volume can kill your reporting solution. And if you can't do proper indexing, again, then we have to go for Tableau CRM. If we do it on the website, be aware of caching. If you have a public-facing report, don't just get the data every time somebody reloads the page from Salesforce, because this would kill the server. You wouldn't be a good citizen. So caching is your best friend. This is why Tableau CRM usually doesn't work on real-time data, because they also need to do caching. And lastly, I already talked about it. Don't forget about Excel. Excel is amazing. And now into the examples. I will read them out loud. So design consultants would like to see an ad hoc report that shows the installers in their region who have completed certain training courses. And I don't want to jump into solutions first. This is important. First, go down our considerations. So design consultants are internal users. This is just ad hoc report means this has to be very likely be done on live data. This is an assumption I make here. The installers in their region indicates that we have a low data volume, who have completed certain training courses, which means I use very likely contacts and training courses. And I hope my data model does support it. Using these decisions, I can now determine I want to have a standard Salesforce report. So I would say in a CTA environment, in order to fulfill that requirement, I recommend that we use a custom report type using the contact with training courses object. Don't just say I use out-of-the-box reporting. Be a little bit more specific what objects actually you are going to use, because then you can use this this information context with training courses, go back to your data model and check if your suggestion actually is supported by the data model you built. Maybe you never build a connection between the contacts and the training courses. This might need that you have to update your data model. So reporting requirements are another additional check to make sure your data model is correct. The next one is, this is from Laptops to Schools, one of my favorite mock exams. Laptop to Schools would like to see a trend report showing the number and monetary value of laptops donated by the top 10 corporations by quarter over the past 5 years. I started at the back. Past 5 years is a good indicator that the data actually doesn't live in Salesforce anymore. Very often we offload old data into a data warehouse. So we already know it's either cross-platform or off-platform reporting. Then, but we know Laptop to Schools that we have internal authenticated users. And we need some data crunching because we need it by quarter and the top 10 corporations. So this leads me to Tableau CRM because it's internal, authenticated, high data volume, off platform. If I just would have gone with the first thing which comes to my mind, I would have probably went with custom report type and I would have missed the off platform part and the high data volume part. And the last one, Johann, me, I would like to display the number of sold AppExchange apps this year on my website. I do the same again. I start at the back. Website means unauthenticated, public facing. Then number of sold AppExchange apps, of course, high volume into the millions soon. And I need some data crunching because it's the display of the number. The number is an amount, is a count. Therefore, I go with unauthenticated high data volume on but the data lives on platform. It's Salesforce data. I go with the HTML plus ESB plus some caching or with Tableau if I already have Tableau. In my personal case, I actually will build that soon. I don't have Tableau, so I will go with the HTML version of going about it. And with that, I actually conclude today's Road to CTA already, and I'm now looking forward to ask more questions to Rikke. So please know your reporting considerations, put effort into the reporting part of the CTA scenario. It's really important. And with that, I open back to Ashvin. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Johan. I think there's a lot of good key takeaways from your session, Johan, as an architect point of view. There are some comments in the chat section, but if you can make me presenter, we have two interesting questions that I tried to just catch it up, and for everybody's, okay. Can you please make me presenter so that I can share my screen and maybe that would help. Am I the presenter now? No,
I
still says.
no, I make you the I make you the host. Here you go. Thank you.
I still can't say you can't do it. Okay, yeah. Okay, give me a minute. I'll just share my screen. So here we go. I'll just do one. Okay, so here is one of the question that we have. So I just tried to sketch it up for everybody's information. On the right hand side, there's a verbose question, but the question is, Ricky, there's an opportunity object and there are some tasks associated with opportunity. Opportunity has a close date as well as task also has a close date, right? And based on the opportunity close, based on the task close date, the prediction needs to be built to predict the opportunity close date, right? So that prediction has been built, it has been deployed. The issue is that this prediction is improving based on the opportunity close date field only, but the requirement is to actually consider a task close date field as well. The prediction is only on the opportunity close date field for the human part, and the expectation is that it should take both opportunity close date as well as task close date. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that scenario. Okay, so here's the thing. When you're trying to make any predictions, the way that you're building your data set, the data set that you have should kind of be similar. So in the sense, if I want to predict anything around opportunities, the level, the grain of my data set should be opportunity. So when you're saying task, you can't really, you can probably, or you, as you show here, you can have several different tasks for one opportunity. So which task are we gonna look at for you to include that into your specific opportunity prediction? So you would probably have to start doing some kind of manipulation. And I guess it kind of depends on what you're trying to do, of course, but there is options of maybe doing some kind of roll up with calculation of when was the last task created or closed, or, you know, and you can then bring that up into the opportunity level. So that would be some data manipulation with probably some windowing functions, and then joining it back into the opportunity afterwards to kind of come around with some of these calculations. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
So can I try to understand? So I have to flatten the data?
So yeah, I mean, you have, so if you're trying to predict something around opportunities, a general rule of thumb is what you have in your data set, what you have in your training data set should represent the object that you're trying to predict something of. So if you are having a low, like the granularity of task, trying to predict your opportunity, that's not going to work. That's not going to be good for your data set. So what you want to do is then maybe do some kind of calculation first on your task, and then you want to roll it up, kind of like when you do formula fields in core Salesforce, onto the opportunity level, and then bring it in. Because you're going to have a lot of conflicting data. I mean, you have like each row is going to be symbolizing of your task, and so, and the opportunity, the same opportunity will be there multiple times, and that's not really going to be very indicative for your training data set. So that's why I'm saying a general rule of thumb is that you want to bring it up to the same level, but that doesn't mean you can't include task information. You just want to make sure you roll it up, and that's just something you can do in your data preparation.
Thanks, Ricky. Next question, again, I just try to, and that's going to be a simple question, I guess. So what Vishal is asking from Delhi is that, you know, he has a So opportunity, I've taken an example. He has not talked about opportunity as such, but for any object, if you want to get value of a particular timestamp or report of a particular timestamp, can we do it without snapshot? So if we have a snapshot, for example, then I know that, the value of the opportunity at 1st of Jan 2021 was this from the snapshot. But what he wants to know is on-demand value at a particular timestamp without saving a snapshot. Can it be done through any of the tools?
Well, if you have your opportunity history object, and you bring that into your opportunity, you will have history information that way. But again, depending on, the data set will be designed depending on what the use case is. Again, you can start at the lowest level, which is the history. So you're going to have for each kind of change in an opportunity record, you'll have a record, and then you can bring it in and add in your opportunity information. So if you're trying to do some of that sort of stuff, you can do that, but you can also, again, roll some of the information up, but it depends on the use case. There is actually if my memory serves me correct, I think there is a templated app in Analytics or in TCRM where you can go in and do, it's not the trending. I forget the name of it, but there is one of them that is actually looking at, which is, I think it's pipeline or history. Sorry, I don't remember all the templates, but there's one of them where it does actually use the history object over having the snapshots and taking a snapshot in time.
And to come back to make the short architect answer, no, there's no alternative. I would, besides a few, let's say, workaround using the opportunity field history, which is, from my personal experience, a little bit fiddly because it is archived after some time. You can't really rely on it. Maybe an admin changes which field are tracked in the history, and suddenly this suddenly doesn't work anymore. We have a link.
Yeah. It can.
Sorry, Ashvin.
I'm sorry, Ashvin, we're losing you. Can you maybe shut off your camera? It might get better then.
But then it comes with a cost. You can even buy Shield that will have longer history of your data. But yeah. Okay, is it better now?
It's better.
Hello.
Yes.
Am I audible? Okay, great. Okay, awesome. So we don't have any more question from the chat, and we are over 5 minutes as well. So I think that's pretty much it from the session. The session recording will be available on the SAIMA group. And okay, there's one question. Yeah, so let's take this last question from Lilith. I'm being biased because she's one of the organizers, so she may not give me a chance next time if I don't ask her questions. So, yeah, the possibility to bring in the data via the API, does this mean we could create a type of custom connector to create a data set, Rikke?
Well, the point is here that you have to have something that pushes it into TCRM, right? So typically middleware is a good solution. We also have data set utils, which is, I think it's on, you can find on GitHub if you just search for it. And basically you can create then listeners. So if you drop it on a place, then you can just bring it into TCRM as well. It goes directly into the data set. But yeah, typically you will need to find some way of pulling the data and then pushing it into TCRM. We don't have any options within TCRM to say, oh, okay, let's go build a custom connector and then from TCRM go fetch it to push it in. So it is something you have to build outside, but yeah.
So do I understand it correct? So Tableau CRM, TCRM, sorry, I have to get with the lingo, does not do pull with the data. You always have to push it into Einstein Analytics, correct?
Yes. So the only time where we do a little bit of a pull, I mean, if you saw the landscape diagram that I had, it's just for the scheduling where we actually say, hey, now we have a schedule to go and fetch from those connectors that we have and then push it in. But in terms of any on-prem data and stuff like that, you need to have some other kind of like tools to push it in.
So can I follow up there? Do you usually see it via the ETL or or the ESB?
I don't know. Can you specify a little bit more?
Is this, let's say, how often is the data pushed into the Einstein Analytics Tableau CRM? Do you see it like once a day or rather in a real-time fashion or near real-time?
I mean, there are some governance limits around this, and I don't remember them on top of mind, but they're in the documentation. But how often you can update a data set and also how big the files can be that you're pushing in. So you do have to keep that in mind. And then also depending on the data volume, right? Because some of them, some might be dealing with, let's say, billions of rows. And if you're not pushing it at the delta, it's going to take a lot of hours probably to pull that in, right? So you're not going to deal with live data in that scenario. So it comes down to the use case, but yeah, there are some governance limits that you need to be aware of. So I wouldn't say live data, no.
There's someone, so you can actually deal with billions of records?
Yes. So we have one of my customers, they have at least 1 billion records in one of their data sets. We can have up to 2 billion rows of data in one data set. And you have by the platform, I think it's 10 billion rows of data that you can push it and deal with. So yeah.
Okay. Where do you personally see the difference between Tableau and Tableau CRM?
So typically you would, I mean, what we use with Tableau CRM, right, is it is native to Salesforce. So if you're dealing with any kind of CRM data, right, that is going to be an obvious use case because you don't have to deal with taking it out of the data center. So there's that whole kind of security. The other thing that we also have built in is all these custom actions, and we're leveraging the same users. We're leveraging the sharing. So if you want to use Chatter, if you want to use Action Framework, all of this you can set up in the middle in a matter of minutes. Now, obviously, not all of your users are going to be on Salesforce, right? Like you're going to have external, maybe like finance that's not logging in. And that's where Tableau is going to be more for like the wider enterprise. That's really where Tableau is strong, right? But for anything like CRM focused, that's where I would say, hey, if you're using all of your opportunities accounts and you're spicing it up with external data and it's for your CRM users, that's where I see the obvious use case for TCRM.
Okay, so do you do you see Tableau and Tableau CRM actually be used in parallel in some of your customers' places?
Yes, I mean, I have to be honest and say in the cases that I work, it's you know, I sit under the TCRM product team. So I don't really engage on a Tableau side and see what they're doing in terms of the customer interactions. But yeah, we definitely do see use cases where or have customers that have both. Yeah.
There's a question. It says, what is the basic difference between a data flow and a recipe? What are the advantages of one over another? When do you recommend choosing a data set, data flow?
That's a good question. So data flow is kind of our legacy thing. So we had when it was back when Salesforce acquired Tableau CRM, which obviously will call something different back then. It came with the data flows. Now, if you work with it, even back then, it didn't even have like a UI way of interacting. It was all JSONs and yeah. So that's kind of our legacy solution. We then realized, of course, and I think there is actually a blog on my blog where we're describing the whole movement into the recipe. Essentially, what happened was we wanted to make it more user-friendly, and did a whole lot of research on figuring out how can we actually make this better for our users. So started developing out the recipes, which also technically are leveraging some more out of the box functionalities, but that's really where we're going to go in the future. So look at data flows as like a legacy thing, and we are not really going to do any more future development. Again, forward-looking statement in terms of what I know that's coming is not really being enhancement of the data flow. It's all going to be enhancement on the recipes. And that's also where you can start looking at some of the machine learning capabilities. So if you wanted to look at clustering, time series, sentiment analysis, we have those built in, but also just in terms of the friendliness and how to work with data, it's just really a lot easier to do with recipes. And that's where we're gonna put the effort going forward.
That helps. So definitely, I think you got your answer, Avinash. So another question that, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So the next question that we have is maximum number of records written for a batch Apex query in database query locator is 50 million. Now, if you're using a Apex batch class, so why are you saying the LWC reports can be an option when architecting reports? It's more for Johann, I guess.
Yeah, and we always have to consider user experience as well. Just because it's technically possible doesn't mean it's a good solution. And I think this is where Tableau CRM came into place. We had a lot of really bad performing reports, as far as I remember, 5 to 10 years ago. And I was so happy if we finally could start to offload these long running reports, which timed out on a regular basis, to Tableau CRM as a proper solution for BI. Is this something, Rikke, you see from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to second that. I mean, just because you can do something doesn't always mean you have to. And that also comes in place for TCRM. Just because you can run a data sync every 15 minutes doesn't mean you should, because, I mean, it's going to hit some other limits, right? So there's always going to be those scenarios. And yeah, I mean, always consider, just because you can run something directly live, what is the use case for having it live? Is it just because some person is sitting there saying, I want, or is there? Exactly.
And then the follow-up question. Okay, so now you know that the campaign did perform less well in the last 2 minutes. What do you do now?
Yeah, but also, how often are you actually updating your data? Like, you know, if you have salespeople, are they actually sitting every day, every 5 minutes, and updating and entering in their opportunities? I mean, I can't really talk for all A's, but, you know, the ones that I work with in my consulting career, and it's not like, you know, of course they're in Salesforce, but they're not sitting every single minute and updating everything. They have other things to do, right? So what is the logic that you're expecting something to have changed within the 5 minutes or even hour? For a lot of organization. And I think that's always something that you need to push back on your users and say, like, what is actually the requirements here? And just because you can do it, should we actually do it? Is there a really good use case for it? And sometimes the answer is yes, there is a good use case for it. And sometimes there is not. And that's also why, from a Tableau CRM perspective, why we have live queries and why you can go in and embed live queries within your dashboard, because there are real use cases where it makes sense, but there is limitations around that, of course.
And maybe to follow up there, this is, I would say, even also our architects or consultants consideration. I had that a couple of weeks ago with one of my clients. The plan was to build a really complex data flow with reporting engine and all that kind of stuff. And at some point, somebody asked, like, how often do you actually use this data? Like, literally, like the end product, the report, how often is the report used? And then we came up with, like, once a year they need this data for their big once a year meeting. So what we did, this actually killed the whole meeting, because then we said, okay, let's go with Excel. Why not? Always ask who, how often.
Definitely, these are key questions that you should be asking when you are in consulting, because business may always say, we want stars and moon, but they may not be going to their roof once a year. So yeah, one more question that I had, Ricky, whenever you refresh a data set, right, it creates another version of it. It doesn't always updates the same data set. What do you think is the logic behind it? Because if you're using that data set in Salesforce for some reason, so you always refer to that data set using IDs, right? And those IDs have changed, then there's another task for the developer to actually write a batch job after every refresh to get the new ID and then update his settings to refer to the new version ID of the data set. So any any insights around why it is like that?
To be honest, I don't really have an answer there. I do know that it could be a reason. I mean, I would have to go back and figure it out. But we do also allow you to revert back in time for like backup purposes, and we keep like a history. So if you wanted to go back, we do have that capability when you go into the data set itself. So I'm thinking it has something to do with that, but I would probably have to go ahead and do some investigation for that specific question.
Okay. There's another question which is on time-based and event-based scheduling of the data flows. So the requirement is that few data flows will be running based on the sequence. For instance, an opportunity data flow will run only after account data flow runs, because there is a dependency, right? And then, so how do we approach this solution? Is that possible from an event-based scheduling? Because your time-based scheduling is not much of use, because in that initial data, if the initial data flow fails, which is for the account, right, then the subsequent data flow will also not run. So, so how do we do that sequencing, and what is the best, the time-based or the event-based?
There are two things. So the first thing is we have time-based and event-based scheduling. So event-based is going off of your connector right now. However, if you go into the summer release notes, you'll see that we're actually going to have something come out that is allowing you to have event-based off of what's it called, dependent data flows. So when a data flow up to 5 is going to end, it's not in the sandboxes right now. I think there is a little bit of a delay on it, but it's still in it's still hopefully forward-looking statement getting out. If you go into the data orchestration blog that I put on the screen, I'm happy to share, but also you can just go to the blog and look for the 7th part 7 of the data orchestration. There is actually this whole topic is discussed, and there is also some sample code of how you can set this up. Yeah.
Okay, I think that blog would be helpful, Avinash, if you could go into that. Another question is more on the security part of it. So, the Tableau or the Einstein is not just for Salesforce. You can actually source data from multiple sources. And a very common use case is a data lake, right? So all the data warehouse or data lake wherein all the enterprise data is stored once that is of no use in Salesforce after 6 months or a year, right? And then if you want to do a historical reporting, then you source some of the data from your data lake, and then you source some of the data from Salesforce, and you try to mash them up in Einstein, and then you want to show. But a unique requirement was, even that data that is coming from data lake, that needs to respect Salesforce security. So if I don't have access to some of the records in Salesforce, when that data was in Salesforce, right? Even now, I should not be having the access to those opportunity or those accounts and so on. I hope I was clear in the question.
So from a TCRM perspective, as soon as you start with dealing any kind of external data, and even if you're dealing with core Salesforce data, that's where you use the security predicate. So we're not really inheriting anything from your data lake, but you can, when you're bringing in the data, make sure you have different table or like columns already filled out with who can access it. And as long as you can map it back into your user object that you have in Salesforce and say, hey, yes or no, then you can set up these security predicates to define who can access this specific row.
Got it. Makes sense. Another point that, again, sorry, I'm just going on and on and on, but I'm very interested in this topic and been exploring lately. So there's just a lot of questions out there. There's a requirement wherein users are actually using some pick list values or things like that for the joins, right? To join the data from various sources, and there are cases wherein there's no data in those pick list values, like the value is none because it was not mandatory value and so on. So in such cases, what's the best practice recommended? Because those data are left out and those are not usually displayed in the reports. So you have to actually go back and change your all your predicate, sorry, not the predicate, but all your mashups that you've done to make it work, all the joins and so on. So is there any best practice around the data which is a default data or a null data which you can't usually you overlook basically?
Well, when you're getting it in, especially in the recipe, you actually get the opportunity to analyze your fields, and you can kind of see which ones are, and actually I have to be careful what I say here because the old recipes, and I actually haven't checked if the new recipes have this feature just yet. So maybe
we are not quoting you.
This might be a little bit outdated, but there is actually a way for you to go into preview and look at a column and see an analysis of what type, like what values are used and how many null values are you dealing with. And that scenario, you can actually go in and say, hey, is this something that I have to go ahead and deal with? Is this something that is important for me to address? There is a lot of options to go in and rectify that. As you can go in and define what's it called, null values. You can also go in and do case statements where you go in and build, say, hey, if this scenario is happening, then give me this value, and if this scenario is happening, give me this value. So yeah, you can do all these kind of transformations. But it's, of course, it's a good point to mention that you always also, when you're building out this data flow, you have to kind of think about those elements as well, that your reporting is only going to be as good as your data. And if you're dealing with a lot of null values, you're, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Can I
There's
ask there
another question in
something?
the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but this is the garbage in, garbage out question, a big one. A discussion I often have, Rikke, and what I would like your feedback there is mandatory fields.
I love them and I hate them. So you know what? I think I love mandatory fields in the sense that you're forcing people to fill something out. But the reality of it is, I actually have a real scenario. It was actually from a Pardot implementation a long time ago. The marketing team really wanted the salespeople, to fill out the email addresses. And this was not for analytics purposes, this is for sending out emails. But I think this is really a good scenario regardless. What actually happened was the salespeople didn't always have the email address. So what did they do? It was mandatory. So they filled in some kind of random, email, just fake email. Which, when we then started sending out emails, the problem was that, we had all these bounces and it, affected the whole delivery rate. And then some of the account managers were seeming like, oh, we were smart. We were coming up with the same structure every time. So then you were dealing with duplicates. Very fun, right? And the syncing issue was then a problem. So I guess what I'm saying is, in theory, it sounds great, but I think I would probably more go into a phased fill out data strategy, where you start looking at, well, okay, if I'm dealing with an account and I have an opportunity in a very late stage, maybe that's where you start wanting to put in validation rules of guidance around things that have to be filled out, because you know at that point in time, yes, they are going to have an email, because how are we going to send their invoice, right? How are we going to send these information? Or, you know, we do know at that point in time what products are added into our opportunity, because else how are you going to generate that invoice, and how are you then going to get your commission? So I would more go for a guided data strategy of having that completed, because the you know, in reality, mandatory fields doesn't really work. That's just my personal opinion. And you know, if you just have all this bad data, how are you ever going to do accurate reporting? How are you going to do accurate predictions if all your data is just like garbage?
And I really like the fact that you mentioned like guiding it. And I think also with the dynamic forms, we have a lot more flexibility there. It's not like an now or never situation where you have to put it on a page layout if you want to really make it clear, or otherwise you have to kind of do this validation rule, which isn't always that clear for the users. They don't see this as a required field on the form. So they're like, I have to fill in this as well. And with dynamic forms, I like the middle ground between it.
Yeah.
How,
Awesome.
again, from a data perspective, I mean, it happened to me that I trusted data which was actually not trustworthy. How do your customers or your users make sure that the data is trustworthy? Is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? Go back.
Well, often they build out the data sets and then they look at the numbers and they're like, oh, this is not accurate in terms of my business. And then we kind of have to start backtracking. The problem is, for me, like, nobody knows the data better than the customer itself. I mean, I can maybe look at what is the null values and I can kind of help there. Or if you run some kind of, let's say, story and you start figuring out, well, there is some rubbish here, or you're starting to group and you're like, where did that field come in? Or why is it now like suddenly in a different language for that pick list value? And you kind of have to go back there. But yeah, that's typically where, you know, customers themselves know their data better. And of course, I mean, we can do a lot in the data prep to kind of go and fix it. But one thing that I just want to highlight here as well, if you are then taking it into all these different, let's say, again, a customer I had at one point, this was before Salesforce, but I was in a scenario where country came in different ways. So we had Germany or Deutschland, or, you know, we had different kinds of version of the same. And then in data prep, you had to keep looking at this. And yes, we can add that in terms of a transformation. But the problem is, if we keep doing that, it's going to extend how long your data flow is running. And then maybe later you are dealing with things you should be dealing on the source. You should go back to the source and fix it there. So that would, you know, while you, again, coming back to what we said, just because you can doesn't mean it's the best solution. So just because you can fix it in data prep doesn't mean that's where you have to do it. However, I do want to mention that we also now, and you might have seen, there is this new product, Salesforce Data Pipelines, which is leveraging some of the same capabilities of Tableau CRM, including the output connector for Salesforce. So if you have TCRM licenses, you can do this as well. You don't need to have Salesforce Data Pipelines, but if you don't have TCRM and you want this kind of opportunity, what is possible for you to do is then say, hey, let me clean my data and let me then push it back into the object, so you don't actually have to deal with it again and again. Something I found I would have loved maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago, when I had to change one currency from another because that specific country was part of the European Union, and now I had to have euros on all their records, and I had to export all of the data out with data loader, update it in Excel, and then import it back in. It was a nightmare. With a solution like that, I could have cleaned the whole thing up in a matter of, you know, very less manual effort and quicker time.
So do you see business be involved in these kind of technical BI topics early on?
Oh, I definitely think that you can't take analytics and make it an IT project. That's not going to work. You need to make sure that you have your business involved. And also especially when you start looking at predictions and building out stories and those kind of things, you cannot do it without the business, because I mean, I can look at a story and say that looks great, but I don't know what fields to include in a story because I don't know the business. And you need to understand the business and what is happening in order to understand what fields might actually be interesting in putting into my data set. Because I mean, the system is ultimately a system. It's like going to look at patterns, but if you don't actually include the fields, it doesn't know what to suggest. Oh, maybe you should include this field in your data set that you didn't include. That's always going to fall back on the business to provide that insight.
I once built a really amazing prediction which predicted that converted leads convert really well.
That's amazing. Wow.
Did you train it up?
You get what you feeds on.
No, but I completely agree, Rikke, and I see it with our customer as well, as that we have actually short sprints for our normal Salesforce implementations that we do. It's 2 weeks. It's kind of standard, I think, like for almost every agile team out there. But when it comes to analytics, it's even shorter. It's really like we have meetings, we do changes, we meet again. It's just the close collaboration with business is essential to get the feedback and the insights that they are expecting from this tool.
Yeah,
Okay, sure.
totally. I mean, yeah.
Can I? Rikke?
So I think we are over 3 minutes now. I just have last question, Rikke.
No,
And I just want to.
I have another question.
We just want to answer that because that's in the chat section since long. So for multi-select pick list, the compute expression doesn't work. So we have to use a JSON editor. Is there a better way to do it?
Well, on top of mind, I would have to look into it, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can get back. That's fine.
But,
we can get back to that. Yeah. So thanks very much, Rikke and Johann, for your time today. It was really awesome discussion as well as the session from both of you. I hope all the audience have enjoyed it a lot. And when this meeting is on YouTube, this recording is on YouTube, a lot of people will also get benefited. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Just 2-3 more points before we wrap up. So the slides will be available on LinkedIn, and we'll have this recording uploaded on YouTube, SAIMA group channel. And we'll also keep you posted on the next topic as well as the next date of the session. So keep your eyes on the email from SAIMA meetup group. And if you're interested in being a presenter next time, please reach out to us. Have a good day, good evening, good night, wherever you are. And thanks again for joining. Bye-bye.
Thanks all of you. Bye.
thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Rikke.